Hello and welcome to What's Your History, the podcast that covers all areas of history, heritage and archaeology, no matter how big or how small, how well known or how niche. Today's guest was Daniel Burghard, has been a friend of mine on Instagram for quite some time now, and this is our first time where we've actually had a chance to sit down and talk history, in particular talking about his book, The Things They've Seen, which is all about the Germans' perspective on the Second World War and the Cold War. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I just wanted to ask you about your writing process, your book, what made you want to share these stories.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. I mean, that's an absolute honor, and I really appreciate you taking time to contact me. And I do agree that it has been a long time coming. It's amazing how much of a difference 1 hour time zone can be in terms of lining things up. So we've made it work today, which is awesome.
Brilliant.
You've thrown a lot of questions my way. Where do you want me to start? I'm happy to talk over it.
Okay. So your book that you've written is focusing on the Second World War up until the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And you're currently based in Germany, is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah. So you did this book from the perspective of German civilians. What made you want to write down their stories?
It's a really good question. Basically, I grew up in Australia, and in Australia, you get the history that I'm guessing is probably pretty similar to what they give you in England, with a little more emphasis on Gallipoli and so forth. So they talk about, Australia's impact on World War II and World War One, and then when it gets to the Cold War, it's more US versus Russia. And you hear about the German perspective, particularly through the victims that survived the concentration camps, as well as those that we have some documentations for, even if they didn't survive. And that's a valuable piece of the puzzle. And so sort of growing up, I sort of took that as to be the whole thing. I got the history textbooks from Australia that were telling this, and everything in the textbooks made sense. However, what I found was I was on Meetup, that website to check out cool things.
Yeah.
And I saw at a hotel for their guests, they were having someone who survived World War II who was a German. And they were talking to the guests. So I went along just out of curiosity. And when I was listening to these stories, I was hearing things that I hadn't heard before in English. And I should say outright that if you can read German, there are many books covering this in German. The reason, so what happened was I was going to these things, and then eventually these people were getting old and they weren't able to go along as often. And so these meetings kind of petered out, and I panicked. I hated writing initially, like all my life, like up until this book, I'd sort of not really been a writer at all. I studied science. But when I realized that these stories were going to be lost, I kind of volunteered as tribute to go out there. And so crazily enough, not only did they let me do it, like some random Australian with a beard comes up to your door and says, "Hey, can you tell me about the hardest time in your life and let me publish it for the English speaking world?" And they said, yeah. And so I really appreciate that they trusted me. I don't know, like why, like maybe they could see that I was going to take their story seriously, because there are taboos surrounding this story, even in Germany today. And so the way that I try to approach it is by trying to get as many different perspectives. If you talk to just one person, that doesn't give a true picture. But if you get enough different perspectives, maybe you get a picture of what it was like. And thus you can hopefully learn from and maybe avoid a similar fate in the future, which is, I hope, everyone's goal. So that was the motivation.
And it's really good. It's a really good book that you've put together, because it's got a mixture of different people, like you said, from different backgrounds. So you've got a Jewish person in there, you've got ex-soldiers in there. You've just got a lovely mix of people, which is really cool, and it's good to be able to see it from those different angles as well. Because I'm sure there's biographies out there of what it was like to be a Holocaust survivor, or there's biography, because there's loads of books on that, and not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, it's important, absolutely.
Yeah, but I like that you've taken not just that, but taken people, not even just from one time period either. You've done it over a nice how many, I don't know how many years, what is it, like 20 years, something like that?
Even more, it depends on the person and what they were willing to say. Yeah, it was for you and I that it was it's textbook chapters, World War II and Cold War. But for these people, that was just their lives, you know. So
Yeah.
I kind of initially had hoped to just do World War II, and then I sort of started hearing, like Walter. I remember him talking about his Hitler Youth leaders at the end of the war, all of a sudden becoming his communist youth leaders. You know, they just switched scarf, and now like they changed political leaning completely. And this guy has gone through World War II, and he's coming into the what was going to be the Cold War, and he's just seeing these same people just being switched from one into the other, and power is power. And so it didn't feel right to just stop it at 1945 anymore when I started hearing these stories. And I appreciate it. I think that, again, I'm honored that they were willing to divulge as much as they were. It was hard. It was not, I can't say fun is not the word that I would use for writing this book. It was heavy, but I'm glad for the opportunity.
Yeah, maybe some of the words you could use are like eye-opening, or just very interesting. Like we all have like a morbid interest in wars and what happens in them and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah. So while writing these stories, which story is the one that sticks out to you the most?
I don't think I think it's moments in each person's story. I occasionally work with a hotel and take their guests out and do a walking tour where I read parts of these accounts. And sort of you get to these different locations and you're looking at actual bullet holes left over from World War II, and you're thinking, and then I sort of start thinking about Gerd, who was 16 when he was sort of sent to the front. His whole life had been lived under the Hitler dictatorship. He didn't know anything other than that. And he sort of gets to the front line and realizes, oh, crap, I've been lied to. They're talking about victories on the radio, but he looks outside and he can see the enemy coming. And he's like, oh, that was his moment. And so I think about that. Or another one that's particularly hard is Klaus, who was a young boy, and his parents owned a corner store, and it's only a short passage, but he talks about a moment, like memory of a girl called Edith and her family coming to buy food from the corner store, and they were Jewish. And he would help at the store, and he would talk about how sometimes the mother would have to hide the Star of David. And all of a sudden, one day they just stopped coming to the store. And this was kind of like his first crush. This Edith girl, like he's like 8, 9, and this Edith is his first crush. And he finds out after after 1945, and once they sort of liberated the concentration camps, they got all the documents, and they found out that Edith had been murdered in Auschwitz. And he sort of just, this person that he was really, keen on just disappeared. And 4 years later, and yeah, so like there's lots of hard moments like that, and each person has a lot of uplifting moments that they sort of have through. But ultimately, we're talking about Cold War and World War II, so it's heavy most of the time. And so again, yeah, it's those little bits. When I walk through Berlin, particularly walking through there and just sort of knowing this happened here, this happened there, having spoken to these people, it's great, but now when I go to Museum Island, everyone's doing wedding photos or something because it's picturesque. But I now I'm sort of looking and seeing the bullet holes and going, oh, it takes a it changes your perspective a little bit when you visit these places with that in the back of mind.
Yeah. Can you just imagine it going, oh, darling, I love you so much like these holes here.
I mean, it really is like that. You walk there, it's a very touristic place. There's 5 different museums on that island and a reconstructed palace. And it is beautiful. The garden is beautiful, neoclassical buildings, lots of amazing stuff. And you could be forgiven if you're just looking without like looking for it just to be like an old building that's crumbling a little bit. But like when you actually take a closer look, you can see the impact from the bullet holes. And a museum is full of loot, right? If it's 1945 and you're going through those museums, that's a heavily fought over area. They had the artifacts from Troy in one of those buildings that Schliemann had donated, and lots of other stuff. So, I mean, this sort of stuff happens in war time, like for thousands of years. But if there's gold and riches and rarities, it's going to be heavily fought over. And so, yeah, lots of wedding photos, but, and I like going there, but yeah, it just puts a different spin on things.
I can imagine. So one of the difficulties of being a historian is seeing the truth or the perceived truth of these areas and these events and stuff. And sometimes it can be quite humorous, and other times you're just like, oh, no, sort of thing. So I know that you also do. You've just said as well that you do a tour. Is it the same tour you do yourself? Because I know you do your own personal tour, or is it a different thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's the basic point is this hotel where I went to it's called the Circus Hotel. I went there to see these people initially. After I finished the book, I went to talk to them and say, hey, you guys inspired me, and they were interested in going, okay. I mean, obviously they're interested in history if they're inviting those people there in the first place. So that hotel already had that kind of lined up for their guests. And then when I sort of told them, and they knew a lot of the people that I had interviewed because they'd had them at the hotel, then it kind of made sense. Again, it was not something I intended to do. I just walked into the hotel asking if I could put a poster up. But, sometimes things get lucky, and then it worked out that way. So yeah, it's something I do once a month. Sometimes I do it a little bit more like independently, but it's really more just I enjoy taking the guests out. If they sign up through the hotel, it's normally that they're interested in the topic specifically. It's not just I'm in Berlin, let's show me everything. They're looking for something specific. They're looking for that more personal touch. And so I enjoy being able to do that every now and again. It's a nice change of pace.
Yeah, I did see. I did see online. This was probably like 2 years ago or something. Now I did see that you had a tour, and I was like, one day I will go on that tour.
Hey, I'm happy to take you. Like there's lots of things. I mean, again, like as someone that studied science, Berlin was a science hub. You had Einstein, you had Planck. So even that, like I can go into those places and seeing where they studied before they either left or were deported, or there's a hell of a lot that is still around, which is surprising considering how flattened Berlin got. So it's cool that there's something there at all to see.
Maybe that's another tour that you'll end up doing about scientists.
Oh, one day.
So what took you to go to Berlin in the first place?
Oh, that's a crazy story. I'll try and keep it short, but basically in 2012, I went on a round the world trip. One teaching contract ended and the other one was starting 7 months later. And I thought, well, this is the universe telling me I should go. And so I went to Brazil, started there, moved my way up through North America. And in November of 2012, there was that hurricane with like snowstorm in New York. It was this huge thing. And I arrived, I was like the last plane into New Jersey, going to New York. And so obviously you can't really do much when there's a snowstorm / hurricane. The subways were flooded. And so I was stuck for 10 days in this hostel. And this dude, he was from Berlin. And, I was in New York. I was going to come through Europe at some point. But basically he said, we've got 10 days together. Let's hang out. A lot of ping pong and all that sort of stuff. We're stuck here. And then finally we were allowed to leave. And he said, when you're in Berlin, send me a message. And so I sent him a message. About 4 months later, I was passing through Berlin, and he introduced me to a bunch of cool people. And so I sort of, these guys are nice. It's not bad. And then and Berlin strangely feels a lot like Melbourne in terms of culture. Coffee, graffiti, and music. The roots of both Melbourne and Berlin. So I went back to Australia, and then contracts and something opened up again. And next thing you know, I am doing an interview for a teaching position in Berlin. I get it. The rest is history. That was 2015. I've been here ever since.
Oh wow! You were just destined to be there for one reason or another.
You just got to go with the flow with this stuff, right?
Yeah. And it's kind of cool that it seems to be like a lot of things have opened up to you since then now, with like your book and your tour and everything like that. And that's actually really cool. Because where were you? Actually, no, I'm not going to ask that. I was going to ask another question, but that's not relevant to this. So, are you working on anything now? Are you working on any other books or anything like that now?
Yeah. I actually started another book the same time as this one, as the one that I was talking about before. This one is more, it's history. It's a history book still, but it's more science history.
Okay.
So I picked 35 useful inventions that are necessary to the modern world, say encryption. And I wrote a chapter on each, looking at how the cultures throughout history built up to get to where we are today. So if you're talking about encryption or algorithms, I managed to find a Babylonian algorithm to calculate how big to make a water cistern. And so like we're talking cuneiform algorithm. Algorithm's the word of the day, right? For Instagram and stuff. So it's just going through looking at Caesar's ciphers. Obviously you talk about the Enigma code at some point, but each chapter is basically covering one of those really impactful points in history or inventions of history. And so, yeah, it's one of those things. As I said, I started around the same time. And every time I think I'm done, I find something else. And so it keeps getting bigger. Originally, I was hoping to publish the first book in the series November. I think that's going to get pushed back to maybe February. And that's partly because along with each chapter, I'm also writing an instruction guide for the teachers of the world who want to replicate these historical experiments themselves in the classroom. So not every teacher has the time to do all this research. So my poor students are always the guinea pigs, building cameras and stuff. So yeah, it's fun, but that's the next thing.
Oh, that sounds really interesting, actually. And I'm sure your kids love it, in all fairness, because it's different.
When it works.
But that in itself is just showing you where science has gone. When the light bulb was first invented, it didn't work straight away. You have to make it blow up in your face before you go, that needs tweaking, that needs doing. it would be boring if you just go boom, done.
And I get to use that old teacher joke of whenever I make a mistake, I was just testing them. So it works for me either way. But I mean, some of them have really worked. They used a 2,000-year-old method to calculate the circumference of the Earth from Aristophanes. And
Wow.
my students in year 7 got within 2,000 kilometers of the actual modern day value using rulers and shadows. And so there are some, I mean, there's a lot of modern stuff, but a lot of that old school stuff worked for most everyday purposes.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need to know exactly whether it's 41,000 or 41.5 thousand kilometers, or if you're just walking from here to the train station. So, but it gives you an idea of scale, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I'm assuming this new very, very big book is in installments then, you said. So like part 1,
Yeah,
part 2 sort of thing.
initially it was going to be one book, but those chapters are getting too big. So yeah, I think 2 or 3 bits.
Wow.
With the first one. Yeah, as I said, maybe if I get my butt in the gear, it's November, but more likely early next year. Because I want it to be good.
Yeah.
I want it to be done. I hate the editing process, but I would like to present something nice for you all.
Yeah. So what is your writing process? How do you go about going from a plan to then getting to the end product? If you want to talk about that.
No, I don't mind talking about it. I mean, honestly, I don't have one in the strict sense. So like I said, I never really wanted to be a writer. So I started this science history thing because I wanted to do the experiments in my lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And I was finding that it didn't make sense without a bit of context, and I couldn't find the instructions. Like all I wanted was just like a break it down. I wanted to be inclusive. I didn't want to just talk about Aristotle and then jump to Newton. I'm in an international school. I got students from all backgrounds. So I thought, okay, this is an opportunity. And I sort of wrote the instructions for the first practical and thought, oh, hang on, that introduction kind of looks like a chapter. And then I got to the next topic and I wanted to do another experiment, and oh, okay, that's kind of looking like a chapter now. And so then I just sort of looked at my curriculum at what I wanted to do and found 35 things and went from there. And it's been slogging at it ever since. And with the interviews, that the hard work was done by the people telling their stories. Like I recorded the interviews and I transcribed and I put it in chronological order, but that's it. They did the hard stuff. And I was just glad to be able to do it. I mean, I had a loose plan. I didn't want, this is horrible to say, but I didn't want 8 of the same perspective. And I had a loose idea of 10 or 12 interviewees, but trying to get that it's almost impossible.
Mm.
And some people I talked to, but then they were happy to talk to me, but not happy to have it published. So there's things that I've talked to these people that I wish were in were in the book. And I said, come on, man. There's a guy that I spoke to, and I think it's okay if I don't name, but he was a soldier for East German government, and his brother tried to escape, and he thought it was a good thing that his brother got arrested. Like he was all for it. Like he was someone that did well in the East German country. And I'm talking to him 30 years after the fall of the wall, and he's still convinced that it was good that his brother went to jail. You know, he wants to go back to those times still. And so that's a cool perspective that would show something, but you got to get the agreement of the people, right? And so
Yeah.
Um, in both cases, I'm kind of bound by whatever's available. And that's nice in a way. Otherwise, it would go just forever.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's good because you have got a nice mix array of stories anyway, but it it's just good to be able to get different ideas. I mean, it's a shame you can't have that one, at least not written down, but it is one of those things where, you know, everybody does look at the world differently. We can all look at the same event and it all resonate with us differently. And I think that's what we need to learn, need to accept more, because as much as history is great, and I love history, hence why I've got a podcast and everything else.
I'm so
And
surprised.
I know, right? But it's just, it is one of those things. It is also very, very biased. It's all based on like the winners, or we're going to mold it to this perspective and stuff like that. And you'll notice that nearly every single book out there, doesn't matter who writes it, is pretty much a cookie cutter reprint of the same sort of thing over and over again, just maybe with a slight difference. So being able to get personal stories of events is a lot better than the written facts, in a way, the quote unquote facts sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, both are useful, absolutely. Again, like for me, it was the toughest thing about it is obviously I have my own opinion about World War II. You know, like I'm not disappointed that Hitler lost, if you know what you know. So, and obviously, even all the people that I spoke to ultimately talked about how bad those times were.
Yeah.
And so I pushed it as much as I could, but you know, I wasn't there. There's no. And then the question is whether how much you're willing to give a platform, you know, right? Like, so talking to people that grew up in that and had those moments, but now can reflect on that was okay. I'm not sure how I would have gone if I came across someone who was still like, oh, I remember the good old days, you know, like, I'm not sure how I would have, whether I would have been able to approach that differently or not. So, I mean, the bias is always going to be there. But I hope with what I've done, I've contributed to a little wider understanding, a little more color of understanding to those moments. And again, with the idea being that we kind of we don't want this kind of stuff happening. And the more we know about it, the more we can do to prevent it. Theoretically speaking, you know, I'm an idealist. You open up the news and that sentiment is not always so easy to hold on to. But you know, I've got my fingers crossed. You know, it's just a phase, right?
Yeah, just a phase. Yeah, I'm sure that's what they said before. Be over by Christmas. That's what they said before. But no, yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I don't agree with the whole pro-Hitler thing, but I think from like a psychological point of view, that would be really fascinating to see like their mindset and why they think that. Because ultimately, what Hitler did was he brainwashed people. And it would be interesting to see how far that went, just to see like what their mentality was. But this is why these sort of books, I feel are really important, and things is getting true accounts of events and stuff, and being able to just slightly step into their world and what it was like. It's like I read another book recently. I think it was called Homecoming. I think it was called, and it was written about Germans that were based in like Hungary and Romania, and it was talking about what happened to them after the war, sort of thing, because a lot of them got displaced. That's not the word, is it? Displaced. That's the word.
Yeah, displaced. Yeah, it was. That's another intense story. Man, that sounds like an interesting book. I'm gonna have to write that down. You have to send me a link later, yeah?
I will do. I mean, the writing style is a bit poor. It's clearly written in a conversation style, which doesn't translate very well to paper. But the story itself was really fascinating because it's about these families where their fathers went off to fight, or they were forced to fight, or the boys were forced to fight in a war that they didn't even want to be part of. One of them did, like one of them was like, it's going to give me a job, apparently it's going to be really good. So yeah, I like these sort of stories because again, it's showing you what happened. Because I think when we learn about, especially the Second World War, we just go 1945 ends. There you go. Nothing else happens. It's like no.
In a way, it did though. I think, and that's the thing is, it's not that that's necessarily wrong in the sense that in certain parts of the world, it did cut off. I mean, if you, and this is a big exclusion, if you exclude the mass PTSD of all the soldiers coming home and then being expected en masse to act normally after seeing what they saw, which is impossible. But like, if you're in Australia, 1945 finishes, the troops come back, you ignore the PTSD for another 20 years, and then you finally start treating it. But for all intents and purposes, it's like, okay, and they move on, right? Whereas in Germany, like in Berlin, like most of the hills that you will see today are not natural hills. They are actually the rubble from World War II with grass grown over it. So Berlin is actually super flat. There's only one major hill. And the rest of the hills you see are actually called Trommelberge, which is rubble mountains. And they're just the piles of rubble from Berlin. And they were cleaning that up for years after. And we still have to evacuate occasionally because they find a bomb that is buried, and they do some work on the foundations. And so in certain places, I'd say England, it definitely was not 1945 done and dusted. It would have taken a long time because you guys copped a lot too. But for other places, in some places, it's still a process today. And that's the interesting thing is like, I think there's so many different valid perspectives. It doesn't matter how many books you read, there's always a new one. And I think that's why those books, like World War II books, sell still, right?
Yeah.
For that reason, you can read them and find something new every time, which is crazy.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about that because me and my friend were in Bayeux recently, and we went to a D-Day museum, this massive museum, fantastic, really enjoyed it. But it dawned on me because even though we weren't there for the 80th anniversary, we'd never even stood a chance to be there for the 80th anniversary.
No.
But we were there, we actually went in the 80th year, and it dawned on me, it's like we're getting less and less and less people who were there at the time, and no one's going to remember it. And a part of me's like, are these museums going to even last? Well, like when it becomes like the 100-year mark or something, or is this going to just be another little part of our history that's going to just kind of fizzle out? Like, oh, we know that, but it's not that big of a deal no more.
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it will last. I think, like World War II, we have footage. Just think about that. Like, imagine if you had footage from the Napoleonic Wars. Like, would you really want it? Probably, on one way, probably not. It would be horrible. But
Yeah.
it's Napoleon invading Russia with the frostbite and everything.
Yeah.
No thank you. But on the same time, we're a very visual, like, whereas before you had to trust a book, like you read Plutarch and hope that Plutarch was reading something from someone else that we don't have a copy of anymore, and not just pulling stuff out of his ass. And it probably was a bit of both. um, and and now you can watch the footage. And like World War II and Vietnam War and all that, like, and so I think in that sense, I think that that's going to change how history is going to be looked at for a long time to come.
You say that though, but we've got footage from First World War. It's not fantastic footage, but we've got the footage from First World War, and people instantly just go second.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I suppose, I guess it's sort of like if you go back and look at those first YouTube videos, they're like 4 pixels. They're just not watchable, right? Like theoretically, you have that 2005 with everyone had the different haircut back then, and everyone's hoping you don't find those videos. But in that sense, yeah, I think World War One, we do have footage, but it's so fragmented, and it still doesn't, to me, like again, maybe I'm speaking from a science technology perspective, like the frame rate of the film, all that sort of stuff is so different to what we're used to. But you come to 1945 and it's got that nostalgia, like that vintage factor, but it's much more, there's a lot more footage. And also I think something like World War II always has the benefit of being that a very clear, at least in this sense, good versus evil.
Yeah.
World War One was a mess. Like this person was like, they're blaming each other. Like this is, and yeah, like but the tension was there for a decade before that, and we were coming out of a colonialist era into a completely new sort of scenario. But World War II, that's like the Darth Vader, right? Like it writes itself. And when and then you move into Cold War, you got Stalin, not a great guy. And you've got nuclear bombs. I mean, look at action films today, explosion. It writes itself. It's the same reason why I'm hoping, I'm guessing, as a non-expert on this, but they keep going back to write TV shows about Rome. I mean, they just released another one about the Colosseum with Vespasian and Domitian. They're making Gladiator 2. They're making a sequel.
Is that a good thing?
Well, like whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. But there's an appeal to it, and again, I think there's some sort of relatability. There's like the fashionista aspect. There's the political aspect is kind of similar in a lot of ways in certain countries. And I think it's, again, like a lot of things, certain bits of history, if you can kind of identify it, it doesn't matter how old they are, they're going to be around. And I think World War II, less Cold War, I think. I think Cold War less, which is a shame. But I think World War II, that's just got so much going on for your morbid perspective, for all that sort of stuff. I don't think I've got any concerns about that disappearing anytime soon in terms of interest.
Fair enough. Well, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for talking about your book. And I think everybody should read it. I will link it down in the description. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we part ways?
I always hate this question. I'm a teacher. There's a million. You can't shut me up.
All right. Free things.
No. First of all, thank you for having me. It was a blast. And again, I'm reprimanding both of us for having it taken so long to get to this. Thank you for showing interest in the book. You were an early supporter of that, and I really appreciate that. So thank you. It's not easy doing this independently. And so every little bit counts. So thank you for that. You're a rock star in that sense. And finally, I don't know, like, if I say much about history, I'm going to go on another tangent, and I can't have that. But I just think that, this is an obvious thing, but I think that history is important. And obviously you're doing a podcast on history, and I hope that you and all your listeners continue to, whatever area of history is yours, like, get weird with it, get nerdy, like delve in deep, because there's a lot of hidden stuff waiting. And with the internet and stuff now going on, you really got access to some cool stuff, and it's going to get better. So keep it up anyway. But thank you.
No, it's all right. Yeah, no, the love for history is no. I'm not dissing you because you're a teacher. I know you're not a history teacher, but the way you learn history in a classroom is very, very different to if you just go and look for it yourself. Because the way in the classroom, unfortunately, it is a curriculum. It's tailored. It has to be quick and snappy and get straight to the point. So unfortunately, a lot of cool stuff does get lost. Unfortunately, and they do. Yeah, Mr. People, and they also focus on the same thing over and over and over again. So like anybody in the UK will probably have heard of Henry and his 6 wives. Nearly everybody would have heard of that. Like anybody in 1066 sort of thing. It's just like these are the things that you always learn about, but you don't learn about the things before or the things after these events, or you don't even learn as to, in regards to Henry, why he was having that many wives. We don't know it. We just go, he was a really fat dude who just liked to get around.
Because he could, you know.
But yeah, so like you said, if you're interested in history, do get nerdy about it. Just think about it in all the different angles you can, because history is an amazing thing. Literally, the smallest thing, history is related to it. Like I got told, this is going to be so really weird, but I got told that if you ever go past a field and you see rapeseed, for example, that was planted during the time of the Georgian era to help with the soil composition. That's history for you. That's just a plant growing, but there's a reason why it's growing. And that's to help next plants take over. And yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's just all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, just history everywhere. So yeah, thank you, Daniel, for being on this podcast. And I hope to come and visit you at some point in Berlin at some point in the future, and I will go on that tour.
Do it.
I will. So thank you. Stop.